This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Anand, welcome to Tech Talk.
Hi, Frank. It's great to be on the program.
Payments technology, the whole issue of what's happening in the fintech marketplace. I mean, the dynamics just seem to change almost daily. Obviously, the concept of the in-depth knowledge and the capability of dealing with transformation when you're talking about banking and payments industry, it's kind of fluid. I think we used to say dynamic, and then we said dynamic fluidity. Now we just simply describe these things as disruptive. But let's start with probably the more challenging of the questions I'd love to be able to get involved with you today is, what are the trends in payments technology for 2016?
Well, Frank, if I put it in perspective with all the improvements in technology, there have been, I would classify the entire trend into 5 buckets, right? That we see as change in the payments landscape. The first group I would classify as invisible payments. The second is, developing faster payment rails. The third is with regards to financial inclusion. The fourth is better risk and fraud tools. And the fifth is around this whole disruptive banks that are coming in, the fintech type banks, right? So when I take a look at, invisible payments, what I believe, and we at Opus, have been doing a little bit of research in this space, is the best form of payment as we see it are the invisible ones. Like, for example, you use, the most often used example is Uber, right? When you get a car with Uber, you just perform the job of getting a cab and you move on, and the payment just gets processed in the background, right? So the frictionless, invisible payments experience, I believe, is I guess the big change. The second in this area, getting closer to it, is what we call the mobile POS, right? There's several companies that have come into play that are building out mobile POSs, essentially software POSs that can run off a phone, and, it disrupts all the expensive infrastructure you need to have to process a payment, right? If I take a look into the financial inclusion side of the house, you see several, the millennials and pre-millennials, all of them getting engaged in the payments market. Earlier, they were the, prime users of cash, but, because they didn't have access to a card and things like that. With the change in regulation, they have become a big, vibrant player in the payments marketplace. So, if you think about the average user base of a company like Venmo, which processes, a vast majority of these payments, they've brought in a lot of people who were traditionally not in the electronic payment space into the space, and has really built out attracted a lot of young people into this space. If you take a little bit of view on the inclusion abroad, there's a big case in Kenya of this thing called M-Pesa. 13 million Kenyans today have access to electronic money, which they didn't have in the past. And movement of goods and services in Kenya have become a lot better with the advent of M-Pesa. The third aspect which I wanted to talk about was modern payment rails, right? If you think about today's rails, they were probably built in the 60s and 70s, where we have the ACH and system which processes next day payment and 3-day payments. But in this land of instant gratification, and the cost of technology being driven down considerably, there's a lot of people driving towards real-time payment rails, right? And if you think about it, people like Dwala or Zap or Ripple, they're all in, building out technologies that will help truly modernize our payment system and also make it globally interoperable. Ripple, for example, will make it simple for to transact. So for a small bank in Kansas to transact with to send the money to somebody in the UK, they have to go through a couple of intermediary banks. But with this, with the building a global interoperable real-time payment rails, I think, any bank in Kansas can operate with a, building society in the UK, in, their cooperative bank in the UK, and transact seamlessly without having to go through several intermediaries and, thereby lowering the cost. The fourth element, is around risk and fraud, right? With the advent of technology and with the advent of so much publicly available data, there seems to be a lot of technology solutions that are being built to validate, people, doing KYC and the like, so that you can use the social data to, and publicly available information to make some decisions around credit worthiness, fraud, and better do risk and fraud management. Guys like Affirm or Secure, and it's it's across the board between U.S. and Europe. We are seeing a lot of trends around risk and fraud mitigation with using all the new technologies and tools. And the fifth component, which is around the advent of these technology guys building banks, right? I think the most most popular one is Moven Bank, which is a mobile-only bank, which is powered by a company called CBW, which essentially runs a very, very modern payment bank. And they're a fintech company that's also taken to banking and has truly made banking a pleasurable experience, if you will.
Well, I'm going to guess now it's been probably a decade or more that some of the evolution of the outside the bank industry innovators and digitalists, I guess, for lack of a better term, have been dealing with all forms of application. I think in a lot of cases when you're dealing with innovation, especially outsiders dealing with innovation, there's not really a sense of context, so they do things that may seem to work with an efficiency, but aren't necessarily embedded in the culture. So, and again, as you mentioned, the millenniums versus the current market customer or consumers for banking, you've got obviously radically different approaches in terms of how they handle money and how they handle even things like loans and other types of activities. When you discuss the full spectrum the way that you're talking about, I know it's kind of early in the game, but I guess the question would be banks and versus the fintech disruptors. I mean, who's winning the battle?
Well, I don't know that there is a winner and a loser in this battle, right? And I think where I think we will end up, and this is where in our view is, there will be a happy medium between the fintech guys and the banks. The banks have a role to play. The fintechs have a role to play. If we just compare the two, the fintech customer experience is far superior to the current bank user experience. But the product set that the bank deals with and the regulatory compliance that the bank can assure, right? My money is safe and, things are being done legally and in a compliant way, which gives me peace of mind, which it won't with a lot of the fintech players because I don't know if they're mature enough to understand and manage all the risks that are associated with it. So we are anticipating a happy medium where the customer front end will be owned by the fintech players, but the fintech players will partner with the banks to handle the back-end aspect of it. So I don't look at it as competition, but more as co-opetition. The banks will use fintechs as one of the channels for their, for selling their banking products, and these fintech companies will essentially start driving the customer experience.
Many of our listeners may be familiar. Some of them are not going to be really in any real detail about it. I'm going to talk now about blockchain, and I wanted to get your opinion on what do you think blockchain is going to have. Maybe explain some detail a little bit about it, but is it really going to have a big impact in the future of payments industry?
Well, the very premise of blockchain, right? So, I think a lot of people are at least familiar with the, 50 at a 50,000-foot view. It's essentially a publicly available common ledger that can be accessed by multi-parties, which are authenticated and secured, right? To put it very simply, the concept of a blockchain, if implemented properly, be it public or private, has a lot of potential in payments because, blockchain tends to disintermediate, the process. If you take a look at the typical payment chain, on an average, there are 6 to 8 players that, from the sender to from the sender to the receiver, from the acquirer to the issuer to the gateway to the merchant to the banker, to the network to the issuer. So there is a whole lot of players in this space, and blockchain, I think, will either build efficiencies and probably disintermediate a lot of people who are adding very little value in the process other than routing and and the like. If their only job is routing and they're not having value-added services, I think the blockchain starts to have a big role in disintermediating those players and reducing the total cost of a payment. So frankly, I believe blockchain. If you think of true value of blockchain in financial services, I think payments is point A that they should start, and we are seeing a lot of players who are starting to do everything from both the monetary and the non-monetary activities around blockchains. Most of them are still in, beyond skunk works into actual, pilot projects, and we hope that in the next 18 to 24 months we'll actually see live implementations of blockchain in the payment space.
Well, kind of a different way to approach some of the insights that you're giving us, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are just really gaining a lot of perceptions of clarity because it's been such a fast-moving and such a dynamic environment. It's kind of where you touch it that you know and understand it. But if you don't get, as you mentioned, if you have to look at it from a 50,000-foot view, you're obviously not going to get the granular. Let's talk about something from maybe a little different perspective. And that is, if obviously when things change and the environment is dynamic, it's very difficult to find good people. One of the big challenges right now in many cases is that a lot of the technology positions are not necessarily being filled because they simply don't have the capabilities of providing the need filling the need that that's necessary. I guess where I'm kind of circumventing a question, but getting to the point would be, is there a career path? Can you identify, like say for example, if I'm a young guy and I'm looking a young person trying to get involved in the payments industry, is there some advice that you would give as far as a career path is concerned?
Well, if you take a look at it from the technology side of the house within payments, right? Which is where I think the traditional payments players have lacked, building the talent. And it's largely because of inertia. Payment systems haven't really changed in 20 years, and attracting newer talent to do some real old technology work has always been a challenge. And with younger and newer talent comes newer and better ideas, and that was lacking in the payments industry. And probably the younger guys still think that the payment industry is staid and old. But just take one look at the investment that's going in from a venture capital into payments and all the technology disruptions. big thing for people to think about is, this is probably the coolest real application of technology. If there are technologies with a passion for solving business problems, this is the place where they make and build a career, because the stuff that's happening is very cool technology, and they're actually solving business problems. It's not like they're building technology for technology's sake and going and working for a software company in the Bay Area. You want to actually solve real life problems for people and have a hand in it. And I think this is the time couldn't be better, and I think the industry is now ripe for taking in this kind of, new technology talent and then molding them into the do's and don'ts of payments, keeping an open view of the potential disruptions that they can bring.
Let me ask you one question more, and as we close, one of the things obviously that we are, as far as the Technology Association and all of its members, we constantly talk about where Georgia leads. We look at the in some of the verticals, obviously, things like health IT and even internet security, other places as well. Many people imply that even in the payment sector, we've got a long tradition and a long success story of many companies that are some of the early adopters and early pioneers in terms of the banking industry, and also even in terms of the fintech marketplace as far as disruption. From your perspective, growth in the Atlanta region, give us some insight from your perspective as to the payment sector, and what are the maybe some of the ways that you guys are aligned with the region.
Sure. If I take a look at, Atlanta traditionally has been the, essentially the nerve center of all payment processing for many, many years, right? I don't know whether it happened by accident or by design, but every payment processor has major setup, and a lot of innovation came out of the Atlanta market. They take, for example, the big check free, which
Sure.
in the late 90s and the early 2000s was an Atlanta brainchild, and technology innovation came out of Atlanta. Over the last 5-6 years, with payments becoming more technology-centric, Silicon Valley has started playing a big role, right, in with evolutions like Square and Stripe and the like. But they haven't really, though they've made a lot of, they've had more of a mind share than a market share, and Atlanta still continues to lead. I think with Atlanta embracing technology and making change and working with people like Georgia Tech and bringing in these talent, Atlanta has the ability to lead again, in both market share and mind share, right? And what we are doing is actually starting to invest in the market by bringing in having a lot of people with exposure in the Bay Area and the UK markets where there has been a lot of paytech disruptions, and bringing them to Atlanta and helping build a consulting business based in Atlanta that is going to service the traditional players, and bringing our thought leadership from the other emerging payment areas like London and San Francisco to Atlanta. And I think that's a value that we're going to bring to the traditional players, and we hope to make us mutually beneficial business in the area.
Exciting times, obviously dynamic and changing, and new opportunities, new innovations, and you hear a lot of buzz about Opus and a lot of the stuff that you're doing on Anand. Congratulations to you guys, because there's a lot of buzz centering around some of the things that you guys have been doing. Unfortunately, we're quickly running out of time, so thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a very, very busy schedule to join us for a couple of minutes to discuss the subject on Tech Talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thanks for having me on the program.